Well, this is great. Thanks, Dennis. Here we are in the Lucile Wright Museum in the Hotel Jamestown, where you spent the early part of your career here at the Hotel Jamestown. So I don't know if you ever think about it being kind of full cycle, but here you are.
Well, Greg, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and whoever may watch this about the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum. The Hotel Jamestown has a glorious history now, about 102 years at the end of 2026 as we record this sort of in the middle of the year, and many interesting things have happened to me, the radio station for which I worked for many years, and much of the rest of the community in this space. And now, at the back of the first floor, let me emphasize that, at the back of the first floor, the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum. So we're a little hidden back here, but once you get here, you can see all that we have in terms of aviation and what we are doing here to promote and encourage young people to be interested in aviation, to record local aviation history, and the third part of our mission is to preserve the legacy of Lucile M. Wright.
Why do we want to preserve the legacy of Lucile M. Wright?
Well, she was a very influential, and at this point I regret to say, perhaps forgotten or not well enough known influence in Jamestown community life, and particularly in the life of aviation in this city and this county in the 20th century.
Give us a little bio of Lucile Wright.
As I often tell people when they come here, you've come to the right place. Lucile was born in the West, died in the West, and there are a couple of influential turning points in her life. One of them was, and I will say this to you and to anybody who may watch this, you know from your own research that there can be a little ambiguity in terms of what happened when in someone's life. And I've been the curator here at the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum for less than a year and a half. I've been studying Lucile's life since I got here, and some things are approximate, some things aren't known. So if you're using this video for research, know that there may be some nuances that need to be filled in here at some point in the future. But to my knowledge, around 1925, mid-1920s, so Lucile would have been in her mid-20s. Her life to that point had been very much under the direction of her father, who was Henry A. Miller, who became quite well off, I think, in the oil boom of Wyoming in the early 1900s. And she was pretty much directing her life and had gotten her into, she had earned a place in, at her father's suggestion, George Washington University Law School. It's a little unclear as to whether she took 1 year or 3, but at a certain point she said, "Dad, I'm done with this." She wanted to pursue a career in medicine. He wanted to pursue a career in law. She left law school and eventually ended up in New York City and married to a young doctor, Dr. Edward Winkler, who was from Buffalo, and on his residency in New York City. He was turned out to be a rather prominent OBGYN in the Buffalo area for a number of years of the 20th century. So she marries him. He's done with his residency, and they return to Buffalo. So that is how Lucile, born in Beatrice, Nebraska, educated in Minnesota and Missouri, and then at least a little bit in Washington, D.C., ends up here in Western New York. That's the mid-1920s. A few years before that, another pivotal event took place in her life because she had a keen interest in flying and aviation, and her father, again trying to direct her future, arranged with someone he knew, Billy Mitchell, who was a legendary pilot in his time in the early 20th century, and one person, I guess some say, would be the founder of the United States Air Force or the Army Air Force in its time, arranged an open cockpit flight with Lucile and Mitchell over Long Island or Staten Island, somewhere in the New York City area, hoping that she would come down from that flight and say, "I hate this, I don't want anything to do with it." She came down from that flight and said, "This is what I want to do with my life." And then Mitchell reportedly adds fuel to the fire by saying, yeah, she'd make a very good pilot.
Oh, nice.
So she has a keen interest in aviation, and she ends up in Western New York.
So she's in Buffalo, married to a physician, and he's starting his practice. And does she then continue her interest in aviation? Or?
Well, it's a very interesting story, and many people who come to the museum, I say to them, Lucile was an advocate on behalf of herself and a strong advocate on behalf of women 30 or more years before her time. She was desperate to learn to fly in the Buffalo area in the mid-1930s, and she passed all the ground school tests with flying colors. But she could not get time in the air, and she referred to it as being skunked. They just kept moving her further and further down the list because, as she explained it, women were not welcome at airports in that time. The men who ran airports thought that women shouldn't be pilots or couldn't pilot very well. But she finally made contact with a woman who had a license. Lucile bought an aircraft before she had a license. This woman had a license. They came to a cooperative agreement that the woman could get flight time, Lucile's friend could get flight time in her aircraft, and Lucile could learn to fly under the tutelage of this woman who already had a license. And she eventually, sometime between 1935 and 1940, I think, soloed and became a licensed pilot.
But at some point in the bio, she gets divorced, and I think around the 1940 time period.
You are correct. In the era of the change of decades there, she reportedly said that Dr. Winkler's prominence got to his head. And she had been his assistant, his nurse, office person. She'd been very supportive of his practice, but they divorced around 1940. So she is on her own and flying a lot, as much as she can by then. And there is a fly-in. And again, this is one of those points that is a little in dispute. It might have been in Buffalo or Rochester or Syracuse, somewhere in that corridor of New York State, an event in which people with an interest in aircraft and owners of aircraft would come together and share time and experience. And it was there that she met John H. Wright. Now, John Wright is a story of his own. He was, at that time, the president of the Jamestown Telephone Corporation, held a major interest in it, and was a very successful and influential person here in Jamestown in that era. He had been involved in a bank. He had founded the Jamestown Automobile Club. He was a very close friend and associate with Robert H. Jackson, who was a Jamestown-based attorney in much of that time, and someone whose life and history you have been very much dedicated to yourself, Greg Peterson. So he does not have a pilot's license. She does. They meet, and I might say something else too. Among her many interests and talents was photography. Lucile was very interested in photography. So too, John H. Wright loved to travel around the country and take what at that time period were called colored pictures. So Lucile describes their meeting sometime between 1940 and 1942 or 3 as a head-on collision. They had very, very much in common. They were married in October of 1944. The best man at that wedding was Robert H. Jackson. And then she moves to Jamestown and becomes a part of life and the community here.
And he owned planes. I mean, he too became a pilot. At least he owned planes. I don't know if did he get a license?
That's a little uncertain at this point in my research. He may have at some point become a pilot under Lucile's influence. But there was a time, as a matter of fact, for their honeymoon, she flew him to the West Coast. It was reported in at least one newspaper article.
Yeah, I just noting on just a note I have here, he owned 2 planes, but I suspect it was for business. So 1944, they become a match. But there's sort of an age gap between the two, isn't there?
33 years. He is 33 years older than she.
Where did they live?
They had interesting you should ask that, because it's a subject of my research over the last year. They had a beautiful home, which is still a beautiful home, at the intersection of 6th and Liberty in Jamestown. I believe today it is a gray wooden structure if somebody wanted to go look at it. It's been beautifully restored. The grounds are nice. It looks very much, I think, as it might have at the time that they lived there.
All of John Wright's life was at the homestead? Was that where they lived?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Now, he was born in the area of Crawford County, Pennsylvania, and was very successful prior to 1900 and in the early 1900s as a newspaper publisher before I got into the telephone business. And John H. Wright was very well respected in the independent telephone industry, because at one point he had stood up to Bell Telephone in a series of cases that ended up being decided in his favor, so that independent corporations like the Jamestown Telephone Corporation could exist in cooperation with the Bell system and still maintain their own independence and integrity.
Aside from the telephone company, I also read that he and she were part of the Wright Motion Picture industry, called Wright Motion Pictures. I have no idea what that really was, other than I saw it in the archives are in Wyoming, University of Wyoming, and they had a finding list. And there was Wright Motion Pictures. Have you come across that?
I don't know much about their history. It doesn't surprise me that they would attempt to do that, because they both had this keen interest in photography. But exactly what they made motion pictures of, I do not know.
Did she work for him?
Interesting you should mention that. I believe around around the time they were married, if not shortly thereafter, she became the treasurer of the Jamestown Telephone Corporation. Now, I want to say that this was more than a gift, because Lucile, on her own, was skilled, talented. She'd been educated as a journalist, as a scientist, as a photographer. She was very capable on her own, and was the treasurer of the Jamestown Telephone Corporation from that point in the 1940s till around 1976 or 77, when she retired.
He died in 1951. Did she continue on as the kind of owner of the Jamestown Telephone Company? I know they had several owners, but was she that engaged?
I believe she was the principal stockholder as a result of his death in the Jamestown Telephone Corporation till the time that she left it in the mid-1970s. Now, let's talk about 1951 for a moment, because it was a pivotal year. 33 years difference between them, and in February of 1951, John Wright has an extended illness. He's in the hospital for several weeks here in Jamestown, dies in surgery at a hospital in Buffalo. Now, several things happened soon thereafter. Sam Stroth was the mayor of Jamestown at that time, and I should back up one sentence here. In addition to John H. Wright's interest in the Automobile Club, a bank, a telephone company, he was very much a promoter of the advancement of Jamestown, including having an airport. So he was a long-term member of the Jamestown Airport Commission, even though early on he was not a pilot, may not have even owned airplanes, but he wanted to see Jamestown have an airport. So he was the subsequent head of the Jamestown Airport Commission. And when he dies in 1951, Mayor Sam Stroth gives his position on that commission to his wife. I didn't know Sam Stroth, and I haven't found any written record of how he felt about his decision to do that afterward. But it opened a contentious period of 6 or 7 years in which Lucile stepped to the fore in terms of advocating for the Jamestown Municipal Airport, and had contentious battles with the mayors, Sam Stroth, Stan Weeks, Sam Stroth again, and most significantly, Carl Sanford in the mid to the late 1950s. And this is a study, and a fascinating study, because it was a very public set of contentions. at airport commission meetings, Jamestown City Council meetings, trading verbal assaults back and forth, and very much documented in both the Jamestown Sun and the Jamestown Post-Journal, the newspapers of that time. It was a very, very public fight.
Regarding the Jamestown Airport, I've seen some old videos and even movies of it being, I think at one point up off of kind of where Bergman Park is.
Baker Street Field, yes.
Yeah, Baker Street Field. And then there was do you know much about the history of that?
Well, I do know this, that Baker Street Field was advocated for by many in the aviation industry as a place where the Jamestown Airport should be. Airports were something that communities sought after in this time period, 30s into the 40s, slowed down some by World War II, and then afterward, community wanted to be an airport community because it represented something about the community and its growth and its potential and its status. The Bakerfield, Newland, Bergman Park area was deemed to be too small, too close to residential housing for an airport. There were some other supplemental fields. There was one in Falconer, behind where the high school is now. There was one along the Lake Road in Greenhurst. But it was determined by several studies, assisted by federal officials, that the best place for that airport was where it is now, on Airport Hill, just outside Jamestown. It was very difficult to convince the city of Jamestown to take that field. Originally, it was developed by private money. Individuals put up money to buy property up there to get the airport established. And there was really a back and forth tension for a long time between the city and the advocates of the airport in terms of whether Jamestown should have one and if it should be a city facility. It finally ended up that way. And one of the reasons is that the WPA offered money to help build up terminals and provide jobs for people. And the Jamestown City Council at the last minute in the 1930s decided that they would go with that, not as much to have an airport as to be able to help provide an opportunity for people in the community to have work.
So when was the Airport Hill location established? Well, that would have been well before this Lucile Wright involvement in the Airport Commission. It was there at the time, right?
From what I understand, the Jamestown Airport's official opening as a private field was 1932. Okay. It was 35 or 36 before it became something that was assumed by the city of Jamestown.
So at the time, John Wright was involved, John H. Wright, and then it was then Lucile Wright, the Airport Commission. That was the location. And what was the principal contentious issues?
Who would fund airport expansion? How big the airport should be, what facilities should be there, who would be responsible for the development. Lucile was always a very strong advocate for longer runways, wider taxiways, accommodate more aircraft, build a nicer terminal, have a better restaurant. Often the comparison was made between the Jamestown Airport and the one in Bradford. Matter of fact, there was in the 1950s an extensive comparison between the two, because a lot of people, including Lucile, I think, thought Bradford had gotten the best of Jamestown in terms of the quality of the facility that they had there. And to have a good facility would mean that you could attract an airline and attract more flights and have more people in and out of the community, and it would be a more robust center of activity.
Today, here we are, 2026, sounds like deja vu all over again.
Oh, you would be surprised. The essence of the arguments, the situation has changed a great deal from the 1950s to the mid-20s in the 21st century, but some of the questions are very resilient. How big a facility should we have? What kind of service should there be? Who should maintain it? Who should control it? I mean, all of these have been resilient questions for a better part of a century.
So the actual physical location is outside the corporate limits of the city of Jamestown, and yet I believe at the time the city operated it, or owned and operated it.
The city owned and operated the airport from that time in the mid-30s to around 1970 or 71, when the facility was taken over by Chautauqua County. A new terminal was built, and the stage was set for modern aviation at what became the Chautauqua County Airport near Jamestown.
And also, early during that time period, it was also named, not well known, but there's a plaque. It was known as the Robert H. Jackson Terminal. And all of that occurred subsequently. That's just a personal drop-in, which has nothing to do with any of our conversation. Biography. She was intimately involved in aviation, got her license, and I hear the term 99s as affiliated with her as being I don't say charter member, but maybe she was.
The 99s was a group of women pilots. And remember, this is a time in which there were not a lot of women pilots, and women in the cockpit were discouraged. Now, to the contrary, notwithstanding Amelia Earhart, who was very well known, very popular, and an acquaintance, a friend of Lucile Wright's. And Lucile had a lot of definite opinions about Amelia and what happened to her and how her life was directed. She did not share a lot of them publicly. They may be in her private papers, but I have not seen that, except that she would suggested that she had some ideas and wasn't going to tell them to a reporter. But yes, they were close, and they had the powder puff derbies. Lucile flew in a number of them, in which they were sort of coast to coast or long distance flight competitions or events that involved women pilots. So yes, there was an organization, the 99s, in which Lucile very much had a part of. Lucile was also, and this is of note, because when she became the chairperson of the Jamestown Municipal Airport Commission, among the organizations, the organization of airport executives, there was Lucile, and everybody else was a man.
Also, she was involved in the Civil Air Patrol.
The 1940s was a time in which there were many male pilots trained by the military, and they were all overseas. And there was a need for aircraft and pilots in the United States to deliver personnel, materiel, things around the country. And Lucile volunteered for that. It is reported in one instance that they wanted to use her plane and not her, and she said, "I go with my airplane." And she demanded that she be used in that in that way.
Newspaper clipping, Lucile Wright saved during her time as Airport Commission Chairman, served during her time as Airport Commission Chairman of Jamestown Area, depicts the newly elected mayor, Carl Sanford, taking credit for the years of work Lucile put into the redevelopment and improvement of the Jamestown Airport. Did she react to all of that? I mean, all of a sudden, the mayor steps forward and says, "I'll take control."
First, the cartoon that you noted, it's worth mentioning Art Winberg, who was a cartoonist for the Jamestown Sun and did a number of cartoons showing the contentious relationship between Lucile and some other members of the community, the mayors and the city council, about her activity at the airport. And let me say that she was a woman, and Ed Byrne, who was the editor of the Jamestown Sun, was later noted as having said he had a lot of respect for Lucile because she was forceful and determined and not afraid, as a diminutive 55-year-old woman, to stand up to a group of men and say, "This is how it should be." Again, 20, 30 years ahead of her time in terms of the women's movement and the opportunities that women claimed several decades later. But she did have some, I don't want to say deficiencies, but some challenges in her approach. She would often go before the city council and ask for money and for the airport. And they would say, "Well, where are your plans? What do you have to show us?" And she would say, "Well, I have scoop shovel estimates." Scoop shovel estimates. Well, that doesn't mean anything. She wanted the money to do something, but she did not provide the specifics on the project. There are other instances in which she spent money that others claimed was not authorized to be spent, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the care with which she might have gone about her work, she might have been able to do a little more in that regard. But yeah, she was still very, very strong, defiant in many ways about the development of the Jamestown Airport. To this point, Carl Sanford was first elected mayor in 1955, and this period of his first term, which would have been the years 1956 and 1957, you can find the most number of articles and back and forth and assaults on her character, and then she would throw it right back. And all of this, as I mentioned earlier, was very, very public, very, very well known to everyone in the community, to the point where he ran for a second term, 1957, which would have put him in office, 1958, 1959. He won that election, defeating former Mayor Sam Stroth by a narrow margin. And I don't know if your viewers can see this or not, but this is the front page of the Post-Journal the day after the election. And there's a celebratory picture on top, and underneath it is a photograph of Lucile doing exactly what she said she would do if Carl were to be elected for a second term. She is standing there in the midst of his celebration at party headquarters that night and handing him her resignation as the chairperson of the Jamestown Airport Commission. She promised that she would do that. He was reelected. The night of his reelection, she said, "I quit." She had, around that time, moved her aircraft to Erie, Pennsylvania, and she essentially drops out of public leadership of the Jamestown Municipal Airport at that time. Mayor Whitehead, some years later, 1963, attempted to reappoint her to that commission, and her reappointment was soundly defeated.
So she'd burned bridges.
Well, yes. And I need to say this as carefully as I can. Think back to the mid-1920s and the time in which she stood up to her father and said, "I'm just not going to go the way you are pointing me." I think that was a recurrent theme in Lucile's life to this point. 30-some years later, I'm not going to take the direction that you're pointing me. I will stand on my own, but I'm not going to be forced into any particular situation. And she also noted there was a lot of recrimination, personal attack kind of thing. And this was not the social media era, but there were still those kinds of things that happened. And she was very much tired, I think, of being in the spotlight in that way. So she remained in Jamestown. She was influential in aviation circles around the United States. She flew many, many, many times on commercial aircraft. Over time, she flew less and less in her own aircraft, and was still, as an aviation consultant, still very much involved in the world of aviation into the 1960s and even the 1970s. Let me say a few other things about Lucile as a person, Greg. She was not tall. She was, as with Jamestown's other Lucile, redheaded. She was always, from people that I've met who knew her, she always dressed in bright colors. She was there to be noticed, to be seen, and she jangled when she walked. She had bracelets, particularly on her left arm, that stretched from her wrist almost to her elbow. She had charms of many, many flights that she had taken in her life that she wore on there. She had some others that she wore on her right arm, and you could hear her coming. People who I know who remained in the community now, who worked with her at the Jamestown Telephone Corporation, said you could always tell when Lucile was in the room or in the hallway because you could hear her coming. Now, we have painted this picture of her as a person who was very forceful and could be strident and stood up for herself. But there's another side of Lucile Wright that needs to be described here, because that's not all the person that she was. She was a very strong advocate on behalf of women, and particularly young women. There's an anecdotal story that dates back to 1946 or 1947 about a young girl, unnamed, who wanted to do something that boys could do at the Jamestown Boys Club. And she was not allowed to join because she was a girl, could not go and do what she wanted to do there. And the young woman's comment was, "Why do boys get all the attention, all of the energy, all of the focus?" That was enough for Lucile, in conjunction with other prominent women in the community at that time, and the Jamestown Zonta Club, to decide there should be a Jamestown Girls Club. And Lucile was very influential in providing the essence of the organization, the property that the Girls Club had on East 2nd Street, not far from what was then Emmanuel Lutheran Church. She was very influential in obtaining a camp for the Girls Club on Curtis Street, and equally as influential in getting a camp building built there, a clubhouse built at the camp. The camp was given the name Hyak Tillicum. Hyak Tillicum was a name given by Native Americans to Lucile in her youth in the West. Fast friend or fast moving friend is the rough translation of that. Lucile's interest in and dedication to young women continued through her life and beyond. She made a significant contribution to the organization Girls Inc., which is sort of the umbrella organization for girls clubs in the United States, either in her will or close to the end of her life. And that money continues to fuel programs and, as I understand it, a scholarship in that organization or its successor organization today, and has been proven to be very valuable to the Winifred Crawford Dibert Boys and Girls Club of Jamestown as well.
Was she deemed an important person at the time while she was still in Jamestown before she headed west?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Particularly she received many honors, Zonta Club, AAUW, others named her Woman of the Year. She was actually named a Woman of the Year through the Woman of the Year organization celebration bestowed by Russ Dietrich. I can't remember exactly which year, but yeah, she was, I think, appropriately honored and respected during her time here, and probably remembered for the feistiness that she showed as well.
Were there other philanthropies that she was interested in, or was it really advocacy for women and girls clubs and Zonta, et cetera?
This museum, $50,000 was given by Lucile to the young committee, nascent committee, that under the direction of Francis Grow, the Blossoms,
Really?
David Blossom, Joe Minorovich, some of the people who were very active and interested in aviation in this community 40 years ago. She gave $50,000 so that this museum would begin, a contribution of others as well, but Lucile's name was given to the museum in respect for her cooperation in the development of aviation in the community and her interest in the development of this museum. And we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year.
Wow. I'm going to peel back the onion on that one, only because I may have lived it a little bit. I was the president of the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation about that time. Fran Grow was the de facto executive director.
Mm-hmm.
They had other people involved. Joe Minorovich would come to our meetings a lot. I remember that, but I don't remember anything beyond that.
Joe Minorovich deserves a moment.
Yep.
More than a moment. Joe Minorovich was a pilot, inventor, and a man who was infectiously enthusiastic about aviation. If you did not know about aviation and love aviation when you met Joe, you would by the time you left him, because he was that committed to aviation, aviation education, this museum, and young people's interests in aviation. So he very much aligned with the ideas of Lucile. Lucile dedicated primarily to representing the interests of young women in the community, but Joe similarly for young people, boys and girls, and their interest in aviation. And his energy and commitment had a lot to do with the founding of this institution and its existence today. And the Blossoms, David Blossom and his wife, from Kyantone, relocated here from another place in the East, had a deep and profound, each of these people that I mentioned to you is a study unto their own in terms of their love for the community, their generosity in the 20th century. They have laid the foundation for what we are enjoying and prospering with in terms of the nonprofit community, this museum, other aspects of life in Jamestown.
that. And as for David, I'm again flashing back here. He came to the Community Foundation just about weekly with the idea du jour, and one of them being funding a space camp scholarship.
Which still exists.
Still exists, and my son was the beneficiary of that. And David also, I did an interview with him way back when. Holy cow. Yeah.
Let me say something about Space Camp scholarships, because the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation and the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum are still very dedicated to Space Camp scholarships. Young people who are interested in going to Space Camp, and I encourage you to Google this if you want to know more about Space Camp and the opportunity to go there. There is a scholarship application period that occurs at the end of each year and runs through around holiday time or a little bit before that through the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation. And we funded a number of scholarships just this past year. I don't recall the exact number, but many scholarships for young people to go to Space Camp. If you have an interest in aviation or interest in NASA or space, it's an excellent way to get that desire fueled and to learn more about the opportunities that exist in those careers and the excitement of those careers and activities. And I would encourage any young people or anyone in a family with a young person who has that interest to contact the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation on that subject.
So, do you get a sense as to who was the driving force? Was it Joe Minerovich to do an area at the airport, because that's where it was located, which would be dedicated to aviation, education, and legacy part?
Well, Joe Minerovich, as I may have indicated earlier, and Lucile Wright had something in common in terms of being unstoppable forces. They were just very, very determined people. And I'm sure that Joe's efforts played a major role in that, but he was not the only person.
Now, at the time, we'll go back to Lucile, at some point, she decides she's going to leave Jamestown.
Right.
What was the motivating factor there?
Well, she was born around 1900, so she's in her mid-70s, and had been the treasurer of the Jamestown Telephone Corporation since the 1944, maybe around that time period. And 35 years is often the number given, though I'm not sure that adds up completely. But I think she was just looking forward to doing something else with her life. She's born in the West, she loved the West, and was interested in returning to the West. She and her husband often vacationed there, so she pulled up her roots here, left her home to the First Methodist Church, now Christ First United Methodist Church, and built a home in the vicinity of Cody, Wyoming.
Now, she had no children or siblings. She had a family there, really, other than Cody was a location in Wyoming.
I'm sure she had friends and acquaintances there and people that she knew, because I think Lucile probably had friends and acquaintances like Greg Peterson, friends and acquaintances everywhere that she went. But I don't know that she had any direct family connection there. She and John Wright had no children of their own. Right. John Wright was a widower at the time that he met Lucile and had children with his previous wife.
If I were to take a tour here, and I will take pictures, but as a narrative, Dennis, what would one see here at the Lucile Wright Museum?
Well, in the background is the helicopter that was given to us by the Keverline family. Paul Keverline, well-known local ophthalmologist, built this mini helicopter as a kit. He was a fixed-wing aircraft pilot as well, and a prominent ophthalmologist in Jamestown and in Bradford. He lived just south of the New York-Pennsylvania border, and tragically died in a fixed-wing airplane crash in the early 2000s. And this craft that he built was given to the museum by his wife. That is one of the major attractions here. We have over in the corner of this same room, John Owen's balloon. He was a well-known balloon pilot for balloons over Chautauqua for a long time, and his basket and balloon and burners are here. In the back of the museum, there is a room dedicated to the TDR-1. That's an entire another interview, and perhaps better done by others who have researched this better than I, but one of the first drones ever built in the world was built as a secret project at the Jamestown Airport in World War II. The TDR-1 was mostly made of wood. There were many influential people in the industry, Chamber of Commerce people in Jamestown, who lured that industry here because of Jamestown's history with wood furniture in World War II to create this aircraft, which aside from the engines and the few other metal parts was entirely made of wood. It was designed to be flown with a chase plane or a follow plane immediately behind it, and it was built to either drop bombs. It was America's answer to kamikaze pilots in World War II, Japanese kamikaze pilots, except there was no one in the pilot seat of the TDR-1. It was either built to drop bombs or fly directly into a target. We have a room dedicated to that. We are, as we speak here in July of 2026, in the midst of furious preparation for a new exhibit commemorating Continental Charter's Flight 44-2, which was a tragic aircraft crash in the town of Napoli on December 29, 1951, in which non-scheduled airliner operating C-46, acquired from the military, operated as a charter, had flown from Miami to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to Buffalo, was very much behind schedule. On December 29, 1951, pilots made a disastrous decision to attempt to fly by visual flight rules, VFR, from Pittsburgh to Buffalo in the midst of what turned out to be fog. The plane crashed on Bucktooth Ridge in Napoli. There were 40 people on board. 26 were immediate casualties or died within the first few hours. 14 people were stranded on Bucktooth Ridge for 2 nights until the strongest, most able, youngest of the survivors, George Albert of Miami, Florida at that time, strapped to his feet anything that he could find, walked through the woods and thigh-deep snow to find a road and a farm and a phone to begin one of the greatest rescues in the history of Cattaraugus County. This is all authoritatively told in the book Hang On and Fly by Tim Lake. The author of that book is working with us to put up an exhibit including a number of artifacts from the aircraft and the crash and photographs, etc. We hope to open here between now and the fall of 2026.
Will Tim be coming up?
Yes.
Okay. There was also another crash that I think Tim wrote about. This is the one in the Asheville, Blockville area during, I think it was World War II, where a plane flew low to kind of see a family member and all of a sudden crashed there. I think Tim wrote about that as well.
I could step into the office away from the camera and show you the program of the event that memorialized that and give you the names. I can't speak them right off the top of my head, but indeed a tragic incident in that a pilot who was headed overseas did a flyby of his home, and somehow the aircraft lost control or something happened, and it crashed as a result of that flyby.
Yeah. Durwood Swanson, who you may have known, is 92, and I did interview him, but he was there, or remembers that whole scene. So as a current person, that may be somebody to chat with just to get back to him.
Well, and we are working in earnest to preserve the area's aviation history here, and I would encourage anyone who's watching this, if they have artifacts, stories, information, photographs of the early Jamestown Airport, the interior of the terminal building there, some of the other airports that were around here, their own stories of aviation in the community, I would encourage them to contact the museum, look us up through our website. We'd be happy to learn more about the aviation history of the community and those individuals' parts in it, Greg. It's an ongoing mission, and as I said at the outset, just one of 3. Our principal mission is to encourage young people to be involved in aviation and to get them interested, as Lucile and Wright and Joe Minorovich would have us to do, and to record this aviation history and preserve Lucile's legacy. So those are the things that we are all trying to stay actively involved in here at the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum.
Just on a more of your personal note, you were, of course, legendary, iconic radio announcer, and here you are diving headlong into preserving the history of aviation through this Lucile M. Wright. Was there a trigger point? Was there an aha moment where you thought, I could make a difference in this?
Well, I was post-radio retirement looking for something to do part-time to create a new focus of interest for myself, to generate some income, and I saw it added in the newspaper that the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum was looking for a curator, and I sat down with the trustees, 3 of them at that time, and that's how I got the job.
What did you know about Lucile M. Wright at that time?
Much less than I know today. And as I said to you a number of times during the course of this interview, there's still a lot that needs to be refined and to be discovered yet about Lucile Wright. We have a flyer that I put together in conjunction with the National Comedy Center about Jamestown's 2 Luciles, because Lucille Ball is very well known, and you only need say her name to most people around here, and they can tell you about their experience, if they were around at the time, with the Lucille Ball family, and personal experiences with her, and 1956, and Forever Darling, and the Lucy Desi Museum, and the Comedy Center. Lucile Wright's legacy is much less known. Now, part of our desire here is to at least let people know that there was another Lucile in the 20th century who was influential in standing up for herself and advancing her own cause in a different way, in a different field, but still very much representative of a woman at the forefront of her life and her industry and her career at that time.
Thank you. This has really been extraordinary.
Well,
As you are.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. It's an honor always to be interviewed by Greg Peterson and to have the opportunity to represent the Lucile M. Wright Air Museum. I would encourage those who are looking at this for facts and figures and information to take what is known and move forward with it, to nail down more of what is unknown about Lucile's life and legacy, because there are many, many interesting things that we haven't talked about and some that I'm just beginning to discover myself. But thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the museum.
Thank you.